Good morning to everybody around the world. Okay, some of us it's morning, afternoon and evening. Here in Australia, the sun's just risen over a perfect blue sky, which is wonderful. So I hope you're all having a lovely day there. Now, the first slide I've put up is a book that I tend to recommend to people. I found this a while ago talking to some building biologists, and it's printed in the United Kingdom. They don't seem to print a lot of them, but it's an extremely useful book. It's not very big. It's only about 150 pages, but it catalogues hypersensitivity and electromagnetic sensitivity, and it's a summary. It's a really useful tool when people want to say, oh, that doesn't exist, or are you sure people suffer with this, or whatever. It catalogues the places where it's been cited, where it's accepted and understood, and it's really a beautiful put together of the studies, and makes it really easy to find things that you're interested in. But that book is printed in the United Kingdom. It's very easy to look through, and when somebody says, somebody saying, I really, would like to know more about if people are really suffering with sensitivity, this catalogues somewhere around 1,800 different studies proving different relationships to toxic overload and hypersensitivity and chemical sensitivity. It basically correlates it all together. It's a really useful book. I do recommend people to get it if you're going to speak to patients, or if you're trying to identify whether they're suffering with that type of thing. So there's the ISBN number. So there was a slide. Here's one of the pages from it. I just sort of chose one of the areas on it to have a look at. This is page 36 of that same book. And not many people realize that things like pH, okay, so the acid alkaline scale is actually set in volts. It's an electrical field measurement. And as the voltages change in the body, then the pHs change. So if we're receiving an electromagnetic signal, we're picking up the electrical voltage from a radio frequency like a mobile phone and Bluetooth. What's actually happening is we're being affected by that radiated electrical field, and we're actually changing our pH in huge numbers of areas of the body that we don't realize. And as you go through the studies in this, you'll find that there are references to reproduction, fertility, emotional states, hormonal cycles, all sorts of interlinked systems that change with voltage. Quite literally, as the voltage changes in the body, it manipulates the chemical reactions. Now, that's vital when you think about being affected by radio waves, which are electrical fields in the air. And that's what people tend to forget. It's an electrical field, and by inducing that field into the body, you change pH, you change the communications around the body. We literally are affected directly by it. And that's what makes this book very interesting and helpful. It provides the understanding of electrical fields and biology and the sensitivities of people in a way that often is ignored. Now, this is a little note from one of the clients. This is a client I actually went to do shielding for, where I was doing testing for them. And they had lots of health issues in a property where a telephone transmitter had been placed on the roof of the building across the road from them. And they'd done a little bit of work prior to the transmitter going in, and you can see that they had between 500 and 700 microwatts per meter squared. Now, that's quite a high level on its own, but very quickly after the tower went in, the values went up colossally more than that. They're sitting at about 120,000 microwatts per meter squared now. And they went through a whole series of issues with ear, nose and throat. And one of the daughters in the house started to get calcium balls, little clusters of calcium exuding from the glands in her throat. And it's a known situation where calcium transfer in the body gets affected, and there are channel gait issues, there are joint issues, there are nervous system issues with electrical fields. But this particular one caused her to start exuding these balls out of her throat, and she was good enough to give us a video. So those who are squeamish may want to look away, as they say. Let's have a look. It's only a moment or so, but you'll see literally balls of calcium coming out of her throat, and she was having thousands of these on a daily basis until we shielded her bedroom, and then in 2 weeks it stopped completely. So I'm going to run that video for you, hopefully, if it'll let us.
Cyril, if I may.
Yep.
So tonsilloliths, or tonsil stones, are actually bacterial pockets. And that bacteria starts to grow, and it'll smell a little like mothballs when they're crushed. And there are really, I've dealt a lot with those clients. It's when the immune system is basically well below what it should be. And if by shielding you are able to create that much improvement in the immune system, that is quite amazing, because people alter their diets, they do all kinds of things to reduce tonsilloliths and make some differences, but often it's a very difficult thing to change. And if you can just change that by shielding, that is an amazing testimony to shielding.
Yeah, look, I'd never come across it before, but the mother started to go down with a whole series of thyroid issues. She also started to grow bone spurs, and rapidly, in her hands, her back, her feet. Lots of, should we say, structural and calcium based issues. I hadn't come across the stones coming out of the throat before, but the whole family was starting to get sicker and sicker. They particularly had fears for the daughter, where this was just getting worse and worse. It was a consistent, every single hour of the day, these things were coming out of her throat, and it was over a prolonged period of time. And they went to numerous ear, nose, and throat specialists. None of them had any solution for them at all. And once they shielded that bedroom, within 2 weeks, it had completely stopped. By sleeping in a bedroom, a zero energy room, all the symptoms have gone away. So, yeah, look, that's the first time I've come across it, but it's pretty a powerful thing to see happening. That's the.
Can I also say something, Cyril, that Dr. Martin Paul, Professor Emeritus from the Washington State University, basically categorically says exposure, especially at these levels of electromagnetic field, cause a massive dump of calcium directly into the system, right into the cell. We're talking about 7 million times greater than would normally be considered, what would normally be considered normal, I guess. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the science is all there to back up exactly what we're seeing here.
And as you can see on that video, they're pretty solid. And she literally just stuck the camera in her mouth and said, "Look, here you go," and we've got the video there. And look, it's right there for viewing, and she was very generous to let us have that, really. Let me move the mouse across, and as I say, that is the view directly across from their balcony. They have what's known as a Queenslander. It's a 2-story wooden house right in the middle of Brisbane, and that's not a zoomed in picture or anything. It literally is that close. And the tube on the top of that building has a cluster of telephone transmitters, and they hide what they look like by putting it in that tube. And of course, line of sight directly, it's less than 100 meters, so about 300 feet from that transmitter that's on the top of that domestic home. It's a set of units. I think it's 6 units or whatever that are there. And the reading on the left-hand side is what we were reading at the time looking across. So that's 120,000 microwatts per meter squared. Now, I know the numbers that you read in different different reports, maybe in centimeters squared, they may be in meters squared, they may be in volts per meter. Now that becomes quite complicated for people if they're trying to do comparisons, and I totally sympathize with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a link or a view of an app that's free. You just download it onto your phones. Here it is here. It's called Useful App. No, that's not what it's called. That's me describing it. It's called an EMF calculator. So if you went into any of the app stores, both Android and Apple, and you go into and say EMF and then calculator, and look for that orange W, that's for a company called Wave Control. They're in Barcelona. They're a manufacturer of testing equipment for the RF world. Now with that, you're able to do easy calculations. It converts between all the different types. In fact, I'm going to play a short video for you so you can actually see the type of things that go on in there, because there's no point knowing what a study is and then not being able to compare things.
App by Wave Control. Across the top of the screen, you've got multiple menus.
You may not be able to hear the audio on that. So basically, you've got basically three fields across the top. Sorry, 4 fields across the top, and you can put units in: electric field, which is E field, then H field, which is magnetics, and decibels, which is a form of attenuation, and then you have frequency calculations against wavelength. So that means you could look up what maybe a 4 gigahertz wavelength is, and you'll see the value in millimeters, so you'll know what type of gap it can get through. This is looking at the moment H field, so that's magnetics. So milligauss or microteslas or amps per meter, they're all part of that scale, but you can convert them backwards and forwards very, very easily with this app. So that's a free app. And if you're looking at studies to try and understand what threshold a certain level of EMF or magnetics might have an issue, it's definitely worth just downloading that one. It is quite a useful one. Right, moving on there. Right, now just an example here of the type of energy that you're trying to avoid. All right, mobile phones. Now this was a measurement we did on an iPhone. It's an iPhone 6 Plus. Now, when we measured it at the head, and I mean, you know, where you would put the phone if you were picking it up and put it next to your head, and I don't advise that. Even Apple say don't put their phones next to your head. But if you were to follow that use the way most people do, you just pick it up and put it next to your head. It's about 11 to 12 microwatts per meter squared. Now, that was the equivalent of standing on that balcony virtually. Looking straight across at the transmitter at less than 100 meters away. And that gave us about 26% of what was the international standard for working, but that's well over what you would use for having a phone, you know, next to your body. It's just far more than you'd ever want. Now, if you move that phone about a meter away, an arm's length away, it drops to 0.007 microwatts per centimeter squared. So it doesn't matter if somebody says, oh, the phone, you know, it's not going to damage me or whatever. It doesn't matter about that. If you were to try and reduce your exposure, that it makes sense just to push it away. It doesn't matter what someone's belief system is. If that energy level is reduced that much by pushing it away, it's got to be a good idea, hasn't it? Because so many people don't understand that it is affecting them. So that's a huge drop from 11, 12 microwatts to 0.007 just by putting it at arm's length. You can still answer the phone. It just means it's not right under your nose. Now, one of the things Keith and I talked about was just trying to provide an idea of what type of issues there are and what types of things people can do to solve them in a practical manner. So I'm going to go right in to identify the different areas that are most likely in people's sort of conditions. People talk about, you know, whether they live close to a power line or whether they live close to a cell tower, etc. But let's have a look at the typical things that cause an issue. Now, this is the easy one, isn't it? Most people look up the street, and if they see a tower like that, they go, oh, I don't want to be there, or I don't want to rent here, or I don't want my office to be here. And that's a natural reaction. The furthest you can be away from these things, the better. But don't be too fearful if you get, if you can get in American numbers, if you're a mile away from a tower, you're much better off than if you're only hundreds of meters away, for example. And I say that because it's very hard now to find places where you don't have these towers going on, but the further you can be away from them, the better it is generally. Now these are towers as well. Okay, now you may not notice it, but they're all telephone transmitting towers, and that means they're hiding them basically, like that one we saw on the roof of that property. They put a tube around it, and then you don't really notice it, or you don't recognize it straight away. So there are apps here in Australia, and I'm certain there are apps in America where you can locate telephone towers and look at what's on those towers. I do recommend finding those, because if you're looking at where someone lives, the client's talking to you saying, look, I'm exhausted, I've got worse over the last few years, you really want to know whether they're on top of a tower or what their exposure levels are. And some of that you can get from these apps, just looking at where they live, where they sleep. This is a measurement I took at a school at Hervey Bay. This is a coastal town on the Queensland coast, and the values we've got on there, 17.5 microwatts per centimeter squared. So that would be 17, if you ever need to convert it from centimeters to meters, you just move the decimal point 4 places to the right. And that's why that calculator is useful, because you can put that value in and then it gives you all the different values so you'd look on a study. But when we compared that value with a study that was done and is seen in the Bio Initiative, which is definitely something to look up, the Bio Initiative, it's about a 1,500-page document comparing studies and indicating very strongly that basically EMF is definitely having an effect on people. And the study showed that genes and DNA were distinctly affected by electromagnetics at a level that was 17,550,000 times less than what's coming off that tower right there. Now, we're standing in a children's play area just in front of the cricket nets at a school. So this is a place where they would spend many hours each week either playing cricket or out on the football pitches right in front of this tower. 17,550,000 times more energy coming off it than the Bio Initiative said would affect genes and DNA. And that's the environment that we are allowing to happen. Now, this is a typical home. Okay, it's a nice new apartment, but what's really going on? We've got Bluetooth, we've got Wi-Fi, we've got wireless technology being put into everything in the home. And this is becoming an issue, because one device on its own may not trigger symptoms in somebody. They may just go, oh, that's not an issue. I don't feel a thing. But then when you've got it in 24 items in your house, you're no longer being exposed to just that one signal. You're being exposed to dozens and dozens of concentrated signals, and they have an accumulative value. And this is something people often forget, is that when you put multiple transmitters together, you get a much different effect in the body. And really, most of the time, we don't need to have these things running the whole time. You can reduce the numbers of things you've got on, only use the Bluetooth when you really want to use it. There are other ways, and that's using connections like this. Now, these are normally used, and they're Ethernet cables, and they're normally used for devices like laptops, etc. But there are adapters you can get that you can plug into other devices, such as iPads and things like this. And you can, depending on the age of the iPad, you can run it off a connector that adapts from these. Now, the other thing is choosing devices that don't just use Bluetooth. And there's so many things like speakers and car radios and headphones, all that try and force you into using Bluetooth. But you can make choices about them. Now, the speaker you see on the top left, that silver one, that's a Bose speaker. And I happened to put that up there because I was given a Sony speaker for my birthday a year or so ago. And it had no way of having any input without Bluetooth. And I realized very quickly I didn't want that. So we were able to return it. And we went through the shop and systematically went through every speaker until we could find one where you had an audio input, as in a cable that was 3.5mm normal headphone jack that can plug in, and you can feed it straight from wherever you want to run it from your phone, from your TV, whatever you want to run it from. And the unit would turn off the Bluetooth transmitter. And the Bose do that in some of their models where you can choose between line in and Bluetooth. So it's about the purchaser, the consumer, making choices and saying, no, I'm not going to buy this one, and making them know, I'm not going to buy it because I can't turn the Bluetooth off. Now, lots of car radios have Bluetooth, but if you go into the settings area, you can normally turn it off. Now, you can still use your hands-free systems normally by plugging in. They normally have an auxiliary plug or a USB input, which allows you to carry on using your phone in a hands-free manner. Now, your phone obviously is still transmitting, okay, but what you've just done is reduce the values in the car because you're no longer transmitting backwards and forwards to the car stereo, and you've reduced it back down to one transmitter, which was your phone. Now put that phone as far as you can away from you, over the far side of the car, because you remember from our measurements, we know that every meter you can get that away from you, you're reducing the values dramatically. Okay, so it's a compromise. Okay, but at least you're reducing the numbers of things that you're being exposed to. Now, if earphones, etc., there's a couple of Bluetooth ones here, and I really can't ever justify putting a microwave transmitter in your ear right next to the thinnest bone in your body, which separates you from your brain. It's not a good combination. So you can get obviously the traditional headphones, but you can also get air tubes, which is where the magnetics are turned into audio, maybe 6 or 8 inches away from the body, and then it transmits it up an air tube. And we provide those to our clients, and it's really useful because it makes them start thinking about their exposure. Just a simple $25 headset, air tube, and they start thinking about what they're exposing to. So it's an introduction into mitigation for most clients. It's a good one to have a conversation with them about. Now, normally in the past, we would see electric fields and we go, okay, come on lads, let's play cricket somewhere else. And it was obvious, wasn't it? We know that that's a potential issue. And for the last few decades, we would have gone, okay, let's play cricket somewhere else because it's obvious. But is this obvious? Here's a wooden house. Does that look like a threat to your life? Well, it is. It is. The occupants of this house have had repeated rounds of cancer. So why? What's happening to this property? And why do we see this issue? Well, it's a wooden house. It's got an overhead power line just there, or should I say it's a single feed line to the house. And the entry point is just there on the roof. Here's a red line to show you. So that's where the power comes in, and it goes into the box on the right hand side of the wall. That's where your fuses are. That's where you can turn your power off to the house, which means that line is always live because you can't turn it off because it comes from the grid. Now, every power cable, certainly these ones here, these are 220 50 hertz supply. They radiate an electric field that's about 2.5 to 3 meters across in every direction. So that totally goes into that bedroom, doesn't it? And even if you went outside and turned the power off at night, you'd still have that because it's in the ceiling of the bedroom. It's in the wall of the bedroom. So you can't avoid it. So when you're looking at where your power comes into the house, pay attention to what cables are live and where they are. Now, around that box, you've obviously got an electric field, but you've also got a magnetic field, because when you separate wiring out, that's what you get, a magnetic field. And that, again, lots of studies showing that that has an impact. So that it's radiating from there and it penetrates through into the bedroom. And in this particular case, it was quite a high magnetic field right across the bed. The other thing is that this house had air conditioners fitted, and the electricians thought they'd be clever and put them underneath the house to keep the compressors out of the weather. They put them right under the bed. So now you've got two large air conditioning compressors mounted underneath the wooden floor, only about 2 feet from the bed. And I mean, like vertically, it's directly under the bed. So these two transmitters are putting, or should I say compressors, are sending an electric field and a magnetic field straight into the bed. So you've got the cable in the wall and the roof and the ceiling providing electric field. You've got the box on the wall producing electric and a magnetic field penetrating the same area. You've got the air conditioners underneath the bed, the compressors firing magnetics and electric fields straight up to there. The real situation is that whole quarter of the house is completely consumed with high electrical fields and inducing a whole series of rest issues, detox issues, etc. And that's why the occupants of this house continuously going to go through health cycles, and unfortunately it's going to be shall we say, a major detriment to their lives. Now, this is the type of thing that is causing those magnetic fields, and this is bad wiring. This is, shall we say, a normal standard of wiring that an electrician would do, and it's bad news for the occupant of the house. You notice the cabling in the back of the box is all looped up, etc. And at the very top of the box, you can see white connections. Well, those are the screens that, or should I say covers, that would pull the live and neutral cables together. Now, when they're in those cables together, they're like a matched pair, negative and live, so to speak. And what happens is they neutralize the magnetic field because the wires are laying right next to each other. But when you strip off the housing, the casing of it, that outer rubber, what happens is they now don't neutralize each other because they're not sitting directly next to each other. So you get this big magnetic field appear. Now, ordinarily, this could only really be resolved by reducing the length of those wires, pairing those wires up, and really trying to keep them as tight together as possible. And that's sometimes not an easy process, and junction boxes always provide this type of magnetics to some degree, particularly if there's like high voltage and other things floating around in there, and meters, when the meters are in there as well. All these things add to that issue. But there's now ways of dealing with it. If you have a client with that type of thing on the other side of the wall to their bedroom, where this magnetic is penetrating into their bedroom space and their sleeping area. In the past, it was a nightmare to try and reduce that, and we'd almost abandon the room sometimes. But now there's a material available from Germany where you can put it on the wall. And we did some testing here. We had 90 milligauss coming out of the wall, and we laid one layer of this on the wall, and it's about 0.1 of a millimeter thick. It's like a razor blade thickness. It's very, very thin. We put it on the wall and it dropped from 90 milligauss to 37. And then we laid a second layer and it dropped to 17. I think if we put a third and fourth layer, we would have got it down even further. But to be able to mitigate magnetics to that level is remarkable. And these products are out there and they're now available, which is really, really useful. This is a little chart of the response of that magnetics. Now you notice on the left-hand side, it's in decibels. So with that app that we told you about earlier, the EMF calculator, you'd be able to relate values of change in decibels and see what percentage what impact it would have. But even in the low frequencies, it reduces it by somewhere around 46 or so decibels. When you start getting up to higher values, higher frequencies, it's doing even better, which is a brilliant product. And that's something that's on the market now, and people can literally stick it to the walls and earth it in and get fantastic results. There are other things, shielding meshes of a whole load of different ranges, and these are used for basically shielding those electric fields that come out of the floor and come out of the walls. There's a whole range of them, but knowing they're there is the first thing. If you don't know that type of thing's possible, then obviously you can't advise people to look for that type of change. This is a wooden floor that is now covered in a shielding material. It's a mesh, and it's electrically connected to the earthing of the house along with the paint that's on the walls. So the walls have been painted with shielding paint, and then they've been connected together. And then you need an electrician to work with you or your clients to do this, but it's a process they can do themselves or have a professional come in and do it. So the electric field that was underneath that floor has been held away from the room by that earthing process. This is what shielding paint looks like. It's graphite and carbon. It's quite a heavy paint, and it goes on the walls, and it looks black by the end of it. Typically, we advise people to get 2 to 3 layers of paint, because the paint's expensive, but you don't want to have to repeat this process. Once you create a zero energy room where the electric field and the RF fields and the magnetic fields are all kept out of the room, you've got a sanctuary to sleep in long term, and that's the objective of it. Now, this is a table that shows you what decibels look like against a reduction of power. So when you're looking at 40 and 50 decibels, which is the type of thing you can get out of some of the paints, and if you put 3 layers on, you may get up to 60 or more decibels. So this is the remaining power level. So it would drop down to 0.0001 of what it was originally outside. That's an amazing reduction, and it's the type of thing that people are looking for when they're trying to find somewhere to sleep. Now, shielding cables. This is a cable, and one of the issues with how people wire houses is they tend to put a cable behind the bed. If you imagine where you slept last night, you'll find, there was probably a power socket either side of the bed, and between the 2 power sockets, they're connected by a cable, and that cable radiates that electric field directly into your bed, into the springs, into your mattress and the metal frame, and it retransmits it straight into your body. Your body absolutely loves electric fields, and it just sucks it in. So as a result, you start getting those voltage changes, those pH changes, and you start getting health effects. So this type of cable is a replacement for that type of cable that they put in the wall. It's very, very low cost. It's normally about $8 or $9 a meter, and it has a metal foil. As you can see where the blue cover is, there's a silver foil, and then there's a metal wire that comes out of it, and that's known as a grounding trace, and that is grounded when they do the connections with the power, the colored cables behind that. So you wire it as usual, but then the electrician earths either end. So the electric field is held together in that foil and then pulled to ground. So it's another way, it's a lower cost and easier way sometimes if you've only got 1 or 2 cables in a wall that are radiating electric fields. You might choose, instead of painting the whole place, you might replace a cable with a shielded cable. So it's worth knowing that those types of options are available, and any electrician in the world should be able to access this type of thing and install it. Now, windows are one of the issues when it comes to shielding rooms, because you can paint all the walls and you can graphite things and put everything to ground. But most of us have bedrooms with windows, and of course a whole the size of a window allows a huge amount of RF radio frequency in. Now, a fantastic company in the US over on the eastern states, it's called Signal Defense. They produce what I'm pretty certain is probably the best shielding material in the world for windows. The New Zealand government's just purchased 7 kilometers of this material to put into their windows for the military, and it's used in all the 3-letter agencies in their major buildings as well. Strangely enough, they don't use it specifically for keeping RF out of their buildings. They actually use it where they've got large-scale use of Wi-Fi in their buildings, and they want to reduce the loss of signal out of the window. So it's to stop people listening in. But it actually works brilliantly at keeping RF out. So our clients will look at it as a tool for reducing the RF. And the military and businesses use it as a way of trying to keep the RF in, to stop people listening, and to reduce the number of transmitters they need in a particular area. Because if half your signal's going out the window, you're having to put more transmitters in and make the situation even worse inside. So by putting this stuff on the window, they actually reflect it back in. So that's an effect you have to be aware of when you shield those types of things. Now, another way of dealing with issues is putting canopies in when you actually go to bed. So if you aren't going to paint the walls because you may be renting a property and you've got more than just an electric field from a cable in a wall, and you've got transmitters coming in left, right and center, then this is a mobile, portable sort of solution that you can hang up, and you can then basically reflect and remove the electric fields with this type of product. Obviously, it's hard if you're in somewhere in a warm climate. You'd have a fan on the outside, for example, and you can see issues related to getting in and out of bed. And if you've got animals that might want to normally jump up on your bed, or you've got kids and stuff, there are obviously user factors to pay attention to, but there's a range of these across the web that you can get. They vary dramatically in quality, and some of them are very expensive, which is unfortunate. But I've been to properties where patients have purchased these things in the past from various sort of low-cost online areas, and they've shown me these shielding canopies basically falling apart, turning into just a powder and falling to pieces. So be very sure that you're buying something that has a good polymer encapsulating all of the materials. You don't want to have raw silver and copper oxidizing and falling into your bed. So be aware of some of the very fast, cheap products. It does pay to pay for a better one from one of the better manufacturers for these types of things. But they're portable and they're very effective. Now, this is another issue. Electric fields have other fields imposed upon them. So dirty power. Now, David Stetzer in America is well known for identifying this and working with Dr. Graham and helping a whole range of places to remove dirty power. It has a huge impact on people. In fact, Caroline Pope, one of the nest practitioners, I believe, is on the call today, and she may even be able to tell us what happened when she provided this to her home, where she had a very large and powerful animal of a dog whose behavior changed entirely when we cleaned up the electricity. So I'm hoping Caroline will be able to share that with us later on. But human behavior changes with the impacts of dirty power. It's produced predominantly by solar and inverters. So solar panels and the inverters are not quite the clean energy that they make out to be. The damage from this affects the nervous system and causes a whole range of hormonal issues, including brittle diabetes and other things. Now, there are 80+ studies of dirty power and what it does to people on the Stetzer Electric website. So worth having a look at that to understand how dramatic it can be with people. Now, smoothing it is not too much of an issue most of the time. You can actually get filters in America where you plug them into the sockets, and we have them in Australia, and they're a form of capacitance. And the capacitance reduces what you see in the top picture. The red spikes are the dirty power, and it reduces it down to a mild trace that you see in the bottom picture. And that was taken off an oscilloscope to actually look at what the dirty power was doing. Well worth understanding dirty power. And this is something you can add revenue to your clinic. You can get a meter for fairly low cost, and then either lease it, rent it, or lend it to your clients and say, look, I'd like you to go home and I'd like you to measure this in your bedrooms and your lounge and come back to me and tell me what the numbers are. And if the numbers are over 35 or so, then you'll be able to provide them with some filters, and the filters will then reduce it down. And people notice the change. It's really interesting, and they start sleeping better. If they have to have the electricity on, then you want the cleanest electricity you can. And if you can go to bed and turn the power off, that's even better. So if you're in an office all day surrounded by your laptops and your computers and power, you really want to clean that power up and remove these transient spikes, because it affects your adrenals. You'll be in much more stress if you don't smooth these things out. This is what the Australian filters look like, and we're lucky we have larger capacitors than America, and we have a plug-through system so we don't lose the socket. In America, you have a simpler filter from Stetzer. It does the same job, but it doesn't have a plug-through because of the design constraints of America. But find Stetzer Electric, and you'll find your local plugs and filters there. That's the type of kit that we use. And the meters, don't be frightened of them. There's no buttons. You just plug it in, and it gives you a number. And if that number's high, you'd put in a filter and try and reduce the number. Now, we tend to aim for 35 or less if we can, but sometimes, depending on how bad it is, like if your home has values of 2,000 or more, it actually puts the meter into a default state and gives you a 1, saying it's just way too high. Now, when you put the filters in, you'll see it drop. So it's on the scale, and then you'll see it drop down and down and down. You just keep putting them in around the house and changing the positions until you get rid of that value. And if you ever need any help installing or understanding that type of thing, we've actually put together a short video on the YouTube channel Health Express World, and you'll see videos showing people how to install filters and get the best results. So there's always things like that available, and obviously you can always contact myself if there's any issues, if you're trying to get through. We're here to help you with that. Now, that's an overview of different ways of thinking about electric fields, magnetic fields, RF fields, and for people to understand that there are ways of dealing with them, whether you live in a home that you've purchased or whether you're in a rental that you might have to keep moving along. There are ways of resolving them in a real world manner. But we tend to say to people, don't rent it, don't buy it until you know your exposure. So researching where you're going to be is worth doing, particularly if it's like somewhere you're going to spend a lot of time, like your office and things of this nature. We've got various obviously contact points. That's our one for EMF safety, where we have professional meters and test equipment, and this is the other one where we have more domestic products, etc. But our YouTube channel has education and materials, and we keep adding materials to it. So it's worth remembering Health Express World and the YouTube to have a look and see what's going on there. Now, I've put a Q&A one up here, and I'm sure there are some questions there, but I wonder if Caroline's around. Can she just tell us about what happened with the dog? Because it's a marvelous story. If Caroline's there, let me just see. I'll stop the share. Hello, Caroline. I wonder if you might share that with us. I remember your dog, amazing animal it was.
Yeah, he was a good dog. For those that didn't see the photos, he was an Anatolian Shepherd. Had problems from day one, which I now really do wonder whether it was EMF. He was scanned quite regularly, obviously being a nest practitioner. and always came up red in EMF. Anatolians are an ancient breed. They have a slightly different thyroid count as well from most dogs. Cyril came over when he was in Melbourne and was measuring all the stuff with all his machines that go ping. The dirty electricity count was relatively high. Now, Sir Khan, I live on a suburban street. Whenever he saw a dog go past, he'd throw himself at the window. Now, when you've got an 80-kilo dog throwing himself at the window, you kind of get the general gist. It's not pretty. Now, I'm a professional dog trainer, amongst other things. I'd never been able to get an instant recall when he saw another dog. It was quite ugly. Anyway, after doing the Stetzer filters, the count, it wasn't horrendously high, was it, Cyril, when you did my place? I mean, it wasn't pretty, but it wasn't, leaping out and going, oh my God, it was horrible. Can you remember?
I think you're in the 300 or 400s, weren't you? Something of that nature. But really, the testing showed that if we can get it down to 35, that was the first point at which the testing they said, well, that has stopped reacting with certain biological tests that they did. David Stetzer told me that the Kazakhstan government took him and Professor Graham into an underground granite cavern where they had no electric fields coming in from outside, and then they induced dirty electricity into test rooms, so they knew the only energy in there was what they put in, and then they did double-blind testing on people, moving them from room to room, testing biological responses. And it was so defined when they reacted in dirty rooms and didn't react in other rooms, or reset blood sugar counts when they moved from a dirty room back to a clean room, so they could really positively see it. And you were seeing it in the behaviour from the animal, which is amazing.
It was. And then the moment we plugged the filters in, literally less than an hour, I think it was about 35 minutes after I plugged them all in, Sir Khan's nemesis, a particular staffy, which if anyone was going to kill it was going to be me, not him, walked past, and of course he went hurtling down to throw himself at the window. I roared as I normally did, and he stopped dead and came straight back to me. And from that day on, I had an instant recall. So about a week later, I twigged what I thought it was, pulled out all the filters for a couple of hours. We were back to square one. Put them back in, and I never had another problem with him. And from going red in EMFs on the Nest scan, he was down to clear. As I say, he died aged 3. Found him toddled off to the horse paddock, came back half an hour later and found him what I thought was asleep on the snoozer, and he was dead. And I really do wonder, because he'd been exposed for so long. And I mean, yes, he was a giant. He was 80 kilo and still growing at 3. I do wonder just how much of that the EMF sort of sped up the machine, so to speak.
Yeah, we'll never know, but it definitely shows a positive.
I can answer that one for you, actually, Cyril. I can answer that.
Yes. Hello, Rich. It's good to see you there.
Hi. I've got a quick presentation about the cell to explain all of that. Do you want me to go into that?
Absolutely. I think we're ready for that. Perfect.
Okay. Shall I just go straight into it? You may need me to make me a host so I can actually...
Let me see how I can do that.
Because, Caroline's information is amazing, but this actually makes a lot of sense. I'm going to limit this. I've got purposely made a handful of slides and just go through them one after the other.
There you go. You should be host now.
Great. Okay. Good. So let me just share my screen here, and then we'll see where we go from there. Right. Okay. So these are the slides. I'm just going to make this slightly prettier. Slide only, and then I should, in theory, just be able to do that. Okay. So in a nutshell, can you all see that? I guess you can. I'll fill that up.
Looking good.
Slide. Okay. So the major thing here is why you must know about EMFs and the effects on your health. That's what I want to talk about. I've just spent, as you can also see, this is just being put together. I've been working on a new book called How Can I Heal? Over the past year. It's been ongoing for actually longer than that. But I've been in the energetic medicine field. Who am I? Some of you may know me. for 30 odd years, traveled the world and that's how I got to know Cyril there. Was actually involved in the brain lymphaceutical development with Peter Fraser. I actually knew him personally. Very few people did, and I was amazed when he passed that I was asked to speak about him. Anyway, that's another story. Hay House, author of Why Am I Sick, and a new book coming out called How Can I Heal? It's in the final drafts. It's all about the understanding of what happens during a trauma and traumatic events. Anyway, why would you want to know that? Well, all the EMFs and actually anything that we're dealing with on traumatic events affect the human cell. And you go, yeah, we all know about that stuff. And they actually affect the mitochondria. Yeah, we know about mitochondria. Well, what you don't know about mitochondria, I'm sure, is mitochondria do not have human DNA. They are actually bacteria. And perhaps also what else you don't know about mitochondria is there are 10,000 mitochondria in your frontal lobe. There are 10,000 mitochondria in each cell of your frontal lobe, and a lot, equally a very large amount in the rest of your brain. 10,000 mitochondria in each one of your heart cells. 10,000 mitochondria in each one of your retina cells. 100,000 mitochondria in women's ovaries. Men don't have as many in their testicles, but over 100 to 1,000 per cell in every other cell. In other words, you are full of bacteria that has chosen to live in symbiosis with you. That's really odd. It absolutely blew me away, because mitochondria are responsible for what is called the production of ATP, and they recycle this stuff called adenosine triphosphate. And you only have literally a teaspoon of this throughout the whole of your body. But this is responsible for what is called the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle, which is this electron transport chain. Listen to those words, electron transport chain, that basically does something to the cells. By the way, mitochondria are not present in blood cells, and you get your mitochondria from your mum. When the sperm, which has the head from the male, comes along, the sperm has the mitochondria in the male, and the actual sperm head fertilizing the egg does not have mitochondria. Really fascinating. Divine woman, yeah, it's absolutely true. Next one. Mitochondria are not human. I said this. Human cells are eukaryote cells. Mitochondria are derived from bacteria, and they have their own DNA. Mitochondria are responsible for the production of energy. They're responsible for the production of heat, and I'll give you the reason why that is. And we talked about earlier, mitochondria play a vital role in monitoring calcium levels, which helps balance energy demand and production in the cell. What's interesting about electromagnetic fields, and I'll cover this in a moment, is electromagnetic fields, what they do is they cause an incredible, massive dump of calcium into the cell. Okay. The cell is very, very important. And what most people are also unaware of is each cell is made of structured water. If you've looked at the work of Dr. Cyril Bourke, wrote a pinnacle book. It's called The Fourth Phase of Water. We have gas as in steam. We have fluid as in the water. We have ice as in the solid. And we also have another fourth phase, which is a jelly-like structure. And this jelly-like structure has a negative charge to it. And this charge is 0.5 volts. Less or more, actually. It can be a considerable amount more, but this voltage allows the cell to do work, which is what Cyril actually talked about. And you make this jelly. Well, you've made jelly, right? You take protein, and they call it Jello in North America. You take protein, which is and you take water, and then you add heat. What mitochondria do is they produce heat in the Krebs cycle that structures the water for the cells to do work. Okay, this is the latest stuff that I've been able to piece together. This jelly or cytoplasm is crystalline structure that instructs the DNA to make proteins for work. In other words, what the jelly-like cytoplasm does is it is communicating to all the other cells externally. It's transmitting and it's receiving information through a crystalline structure, because as soon as you put that water into a cytoplasm, into this jelly-like fourth stage of water, which is inside every single cell, you then have a crystal. And crystals are amazing because they can transmit and receive information, which is why EMFs absolutely screw us up. And all the research is there. So that's another interesting piece of the whole thing. So essentially, cytoplasm is life. We now know this to be the case. It's actually, we can pretty well understand how structured water makes life happen. And water was around at the Big Bang. Anyway, what destroys cytoplasm? 2.4 gigahertz microwave radiation. That's interesting, isn't it? Makes the water molecule spin. It's inside your microwave. It's inside Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth, mobile phones, your laptop, all the Internet of Things, all those pictures that Cyril actually mentioned. There are other frequencies below that and other frequencies above that, but essentially they're all having that effect. 30 gigahertz used in 5G spins the oxygen 2 molecule to the extent that it stops oxygen uptake within the Krebs cycle. Microwave radiation specifically used in the new 5G radio frequencies causes a 7 billion times dump of calcium into the cell, again completely screwing up this beautiful structured water inside the cell, affecting the mitochondria, like 10,000 of them in your frontal lobe. It's no wonder this stuff causes a tremendous amount of horrific problems, so bad that I've had to move from where I used to live in Canada to live in rural France. No word of a lie. That's what I've had to do because I couldn't function. Okay, Cyril was integral in introducing me to all of that. So what happens when calcium is dumped into the cell? Free radicals are released. Free radicals are just these molecules that steal electrons and add electrons along that electron transport chain, which we absolutely need in order to live. In other words, if you took all the human cells out of a person, or in fact you took mitochondria out of a person, you're dead. You cannot live without them. They're part of you. There's more of them in there, in you, than there are human cells. There are about something like 50 to 100 trillion human cells. So imagine that, the number, it's just enormous, the number of mitochondria. So peroxynitrite, the most pernicious free radical in your body, is released into your system during this calcium dump, which makes you just feel on edge continuously. It's a natural free radical, but what it does is it causes the body to continuously start to repair, which causes, as we see down here, premature apoptosis, premature mitosis, which are programmed cell death and programmed mitochondrial death. It also results in mitochondrial dysfunction. And mitochondrial dysfunction, you can name practically any chronic disease on the planet, even Alzheimer's, MS, and all these other types of things, anger problems, a whole multitude of diseases, including just simple things like cramps in the back of your teeth at night, sleep apnea, heart palpitations. All these things can be directly related to mitochondrial dysfunction. Across the board, we're starting to see this now become a trend in our understanding of what's going on. The whole process is almost the same as radioactive poisoning. In fact, the result of all of this is identical. So EMFs age you prematurely. That's the other thing. If you want to live a long, beautiful, gorgeous life, you've got to do something about it. And they can cause chronic disease, brain fog. Makes sense? Sterilization. There are now results we categorically know that this is causing sterilization. polarization, especially in men who are walking around with their cell phones in their pockets, zapping their spermatoza that they can't then produce. And there are certain countries in the world that are not producing enough people that the next generation, they will not be able to tax. They'll not be able to collect enough tax. They now, I believe Singapore is one of them, they're going to have to bring in every year from now 150,000 brand new people from abroad into the workplace. Get a load of that. Macau is another place with similar figures. There's other countries as well. I think South Korea, exactly the same situation, are not able to sustain their countries anymore because of electromagnetic field radiation directly having the effect on what's going on. And of course, cancer. It causes cancer. Absolutely. One last little thing, just a couple of other things. So obviously, we had to add it in. COVID-19, the extreme rush job of a vaccine will contain specific elements designed to attach to the cell in your body using the 5G frequencies that will be able to control your behavior. You don't believe me, I know. But just go and do your little bit of due diligence if you can still find it on the internet because it's being taken down as quickly as it's being put up. And people will say you're a conspiracy theorist. No, it's real. And these frequencies, they are able to cause premature death and even stop totally reproduction. And this is where they're headed. And they're going to put a little chip inside this thing, which will then be able to allow them to milk your energy for cryptocurrencies. Nice, isn't it? Anyway, why mitigate the effects of EMF? There are two distinct stages of a disease. There's stress, which causes all this adrenal release and other things going on inside the body, which means if any of you can't actually sleep or your clients can't sleep, it's because of the EMF. There's lots of other things you can do as well, followed by rest, which is why it's absolutely imperative that you create this sanctuary which has nothing in it, because as soon as you do, then the body can actually repair itself naturally. It also does other things as well that we now understand, and that's able to produce vitamins and minerals. I hope you hear me correctly. It's able to produce its own vitamins and minerals in the right conditions if it can get into the parasympathetic. If it can't, forget it. So the parasympathetic stage is where your body is literally working on the Schumann resonance, which is 7.83 hertz, which is Mother Earth's resonance, is why they earth all this stuff as well, if it's correctly earthed, and allows the body to go into that deep delta sleep, and also going into another, even a lower reset sleep at the same level. Okay. So how can you heal? You go into the parasympathetic. One way of also dealing with that is clearing out the stressful events. That's a lot of my work anyway. This repairs 40% of the mitochondrial dysfunction. We've got research now proving that. And we remove all the stressors for when you sleep, or actually if you're going into the parasympathetic, which is absolutely essential that you are able to do exactly what Cyril and Keith, I don't know what Keith you're going to actually do, but a minimum of 8 hours a night in the parasympathetic for 2 weeks, and you can heal in practically anything, I've heard. Anyway, that's enough. If you want to know more about me, go to richardflook.com store. I've got this thing called the 5 Steps, which is basically the new book. If you do that and you log into that, then I will send you more details about the new book. Called How Can I Heal? It's a behemoth of a thing, and it's taken on brand new energy, and it's stuff that's just I don't know where all this stuff's coming from. Or just email me and I'll put you on that list, richard@richardflook.com. That's enough. Thanks, Cyril. That wasn't too long, was it? I can't hear you.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. That's really good, really wonderful. And this is your new stone house in France. This, I believe, is that what we're looking at?
Oh, no, not here. I'm still in a rented accommodation, which I will just let you know. We are connected completely with Ethernet cables. The actual, on my little meter of, well, we can't get a cell phone signal in here, a mobile phone signal in here. We don't have any Wi-Fi in here at all. On the new house, the amount of EMF, because it's stone walled and everything, is practically zilch. But they do have these new linky systems, but I've been able to do some mitigation there. I might have to invite you over, Cyril, to come do some measuring. I don't think you'll say no to that, will you?
Of course not. Of course not. I'll be right over the test. Keith, let's see if we can find Keith now.
I'm here.
Keith,
can you see me?
Yes. Now, do I have to hit the host button again?
Yeah, you've got to make him a host as well.
Participants, no. Chat, share. Oh dear, what button do I press? I feel like an idiot pressing these buttons. I don't know where I'm going. Host, disable, participating screen. Okay. And maybe that allows us to do something now. Share. Is it under share? No. What am I doing? Help.
Well, I don't have a lovely slideshow, so mine's gonna be very short, and there's no
just let you run.
Yeah, so I come at this with two basic principles, and of course I'm the old school guy, and I don't have all the nice techie talk to give you. I come at it from conservation and then the cultivation of that which animates us. And so I've had a couple of our students give us some blood work, the live blood work underneath the microscopes. They've had those lovely little microscopes that you can put the live samples under, and you can film that, record that and show it. And we've had a lot of nice before Qigong and after Qigong blood sampling, where we have a lot of clumping going on beforehand. And then, of course, after one round of 20 minutes of Qigong, all the clumping's gone, the blood quality changes dramatically after 20 minutes, or after a treatment or that type of thing. So we've always said, in at least the English understanding of Chinese philosophy and medicine, is that we need to be animating the substance. And so what we've been talking about so far, and because you can just, it's so deep and vast and always expanding the body of information we have about who we are physically, you have the energetic aspect of it. And we don't do as much research and put as much money into the energetic research because it's just not where we are yet as a Western culture. Hopefully one day we will be. But the blood work was something tangible that was amazing to see the difference between before and after of just a little bit of cultivation work. Because what you and Richard have been talking about, primarily I would put into my category of the conservation. You are shielding the body from the onslaught of this ever-growing EMF nefarious encroachment, and that's taking and chewing up everything we've got, everything we're animated with. And so all this dysfunction takes place. The conservation part of it is incredibly important, and we know hardly anything about it. And so between you and Richard, it's crucial that we get the information out so people understand they can create safe rooms in their house. And if we can have that type of conservation, that shielding, then the part that I provide, which is the mitigation aspect of it, where you're basically, like you used the example before, Cyril, when we had our talk a while back, that, it's like a bullet. You've got a bulletproof vest on. If someone shoots you and the bullet does not penetrate the vest, then you have shielded yourself from the bullet. If it actually gets through and goes into your body, now you're having to, the damage is done, now you have to play cleanup. And so, in my opinion, what I do is help people to learn how to build what we call the Wei Qi level. If you're in NES, it would be the human body field. It's a slightly different approach, but thank God we had Peter Fraser, who understood the Wei Qi principles from that lens of Chinese medicine. And the problem we have going on right now with this Wei Qi level, which is supposed to be the equivalent of the cellular membrane, we have in all of our cells, but instead of a lipid layer, you're talking about this energetic layering. And that can create a lot of quick repair to whatever damage comes to you. And this includes viral, bacterial, EMF. It doesn't matter. It does provide protection. Here's the clincher. Most people are walking around with next to nothing. We are operating at a very minimum Wei Qi level. And so what do we focus mostly on, I see, when we talk about this world of energy and information? We're talking about the information side of it. But truthfully, as Westerners, and now unfortunately the Eastern cultures as well because they've adopted our way of thinking and living, we don't know much about the energetic side of it anymore. And at this point, I've not seen one device, I'm not saying they're not out there, I just haven't seen that device that really can infuse the body with amazing amounts of life force. It's still coming from the typical things, which are very important: food quality, air quality, water quality, and so on. So in my world of Qigong, energy production, energy treatment, this is something that we are empowered with to cultivate. The other side of the coin, we've taught conservation. The cultivation part, though, is something that is a little difficult for us Westerners, which is attention span and being able to allocate time during a day to be able to actually cultivate. There are many ways to cultivate energy. The ancients knew this. It isn't totally lost on us. Many forms of cultivation that we had in the past have, much like the whisper game, have been distorted over time, passed down generation to generation, and we've lost some punch, or lost a bit of intensity of cultivation we used to have. Why is this important? Because every single organ system depends on that source energy to function. And with our diminished quality of food supply, even when it's organic, even with our diminished quality of air, which in most places it's far from what it used to be, I'm sure. I happen to be in the mountains in North Carolina where it's actually particularly good. It was also good out in the middle of nowhere in the peninsula in the state of Washington. But if I move even into Charlotte, it suddenly goes down the tube because we've polluted it. So we have to do something besides what we've always relied on before to bring in life force. If we're going to maximize this, you can withstand a whole lot more of what we're talking about if you have more of it. So I am one of the few voices out there, at least in my little world, that's banging that gong of please learn how to do something simple. Please learn how to do our form of Qigong, Penghu Shen is so easy to do. Here's the problem. It's getting people to faithfully do it daily for at least 90 days so you can start to feel the difference. And I hope that I'm setting up more blood work experiments with Vicky and also Jim Jordan, who both have a similar type of microscope to measure these differences. But if you'll combine what we're doing on our end of it, the cultivation side of it, with the conservation side of it, I think as individuals, as humans, we have a chance. Now, here's what stinks, in my opinion. We have no way to do either one of these things for all of the rest of the biology out there that we're blowing away with all this new creation of technology. That's the part that I'll go a little esoteric, more esoteric for a second. Our Cultivate Life Force Health System, which is a group of a few practitioners and a lot more participants, I'm hoping to take the morphic field that we're creating with Cultivate Life Force Health System, where you have all this Qigong being done every day, to empower this morphic field as a energetic vehicle to help get through these troubling times, and even more technology coming out and making it even more challenging. But to then start to focus it on different areas of the planet to start to at least provide a periodic healing, a periodic bathing of that energy to give it a respite from what's happening and what's to come. I know that sounds a little more out there, but Richard took the plunge earlier when he was talking about what was happening with the chips, which I'm right in alignment with what he had to say and don't disagree with him one iota. But we have the ability, and I'll stop with this, we have the ability as human beings, if we'll just get faithful with our cultivation, that we can start to share the above and beyond that we need for our own sustenance and protection to that part of the planet, the people, the animals that, in the plant life that cannot do it for themselves. And I say, let's hop on board. Let's do all these things, make ourselves as healthy as possible, and let's start to spread the wealth to those who cannot do for themselves. And I'll leave it at that. I'm done.
Fantastic, Keith. Thank you so much. That's brilliant. And it's great to have all these different directions, all looking at the same situation. And yet they're all things we've got in our pocket already, so to speak. We can do this from an understanding point of view, from Qigong, from breathing exercises. I also have a live blood analysis microscope here, so and I've only recently set that one up, so I'll be fascinated to see what tests you've been doing, because I'd like to maybe parallel some of those here and try it on the other side of the equator.
That would be primo, Cyril. I didn't know you had that. That would be, I would love, you tell me when and where you've got the openings and we'll do it. I'll make it happen on my end.
How about native EMFs? Okay, well, look, the main native EMF is Earth magnetic field. That's not something that you can screen out with magnetic shielding. It doesn't get shielded out with the typical Faraday cages that you put into a home. And when you say a Faraday cage, it's not actually a thing with bars typically, even though I have seen those made out of wood and chicken wire and things. You know, when you put the paint on the walls, etc., yes, that shuts down the electric fields. It doesn't affect magnetic fields. The only way you can shut down an AC dynamic field of magnetics is with cobalt or mu metal, and that tends to be a localized shielding event, but you're not going to be shutting out Earth magnetic field. That's still there, but it's going to be polluted by all the ground currents and other elements that are being put in with the power systems and transmitters. So it's worth knowing it's sometimes in a distorted state, particularly in highly populated areas. This is why getting out into the countryside and getting back to ground and really feeling the native energies there is a vital part of everybody's life, or should be. Are there any plants that are EMF loving? Well, I was told that one of the heaviest calcium producing plants was a sunflower, and as a result I've seen people talk about putting up large areas of sunflowers. Now, I don't know whether it produces a form of barrier or things of that nature. I don't know, but I know that those particular plants supposedly have high levels of calcium, so I don't know what the interaction is, but I have seen people talk about that. I don't know whether, Keith, have you come across anything related to plants other than we know tomatoes love nests. If you take the dirt of that's in the pot plants for your tomatoes, mix it up into a paste, and then scan it and treat it like a human scan, I've actually seen that then treated by putting infoceuticals in the water based on the scan, and we've seen incredible changes. And the late Rose Hayman used to do that with her plants, and that was quite remarkable. So
can I give a story?
Yeah, please do.
So you ask about plants. So our teacher, the one who created the Pangu Qigong form, the Qigong form we do, he has a house up on a hill in the Fairfield, California area, which is in from the San Francisco area. And so to give you a kind of idea of the climate. And so they have 4 seasons and so on. And what you'll find when you go to his ranch, which is 20 acres, is that the flowers flower year-round. The plant life does not act normal at all, and it's intentional. He said, and I've been there. I mean, I went there in December to like get my eyes on it and see it. And sure enough, all these flowers were flowering when they shouldn't have been flowering. The what's the name of that tree? It's a southern thing, magnolia, and the magnolias bloom multiple times a year. They don't do that any place I've ever lived before. And so we're like, how are you doing this? How are you overcoming the typical seasonal flowering of plants and trees? And he said, well, I made an agreement with great nature that if I would send energy to the earth that we're on here, this 20 acres, that it would then, nature would give me a beautiful production of flowering so that my students could enjoy it year round. So I would say our connection with the earth, again, is a very intricate one. I mean, as if she has her own personality, her own intellect, right? And so as we make an effort to actually commune with her in that way and offer up, as opposed to always being, what resources can we pull from her for us? Can we also then say, what can I give back to you to help you to do what you do in an even more grand way than you already do? And his 20 acres is an example of that, where it just doesn't make any sense that everything's flowering and blooming and doing its thing all year round. So anyway, something I've seen that's not a controlled experiment, but a miraculous one all the same, anecdotally.
Excellent, excellent. There is a question here from Frank. Frank's had to go on to another call, but he's going to watch the replay. And he's asking about electric vehicles. Now, I haven't had much opportunity to measure electric vehicles, but look, it does make sense that if you're subjected to multiple motors, I believe they're often put into the wheel hub areas of those vehicles, then you are sitting in a field that's crossing over in multiple areas. And I haven't done any measurements in that. We have very, very few electric vehicles in Australia. They've done everything they can to stop us. We're not even allowed to have segways, would you believe? That's how ridiculously controlled our situation is. There's no public use of those vehicles, and even electric bikes, I believe, are restricted to 200 watts or something of that nature. So they're the minimum to get around, basically. But you can only use a Segway in like recreational parks and things like this, where it's been, you know, licensed and registered and all sorts of things, and they won't allow it in the public area, let alone electric vehicles. We have very, very few electric vehicles. We have hybrids that are now in place, but very, very few. There are some Teslas. I do know somebody owns a Tesla, and I think there's only very, very few people in the club up in Queens, and they've done that with taxation as well. So a Tesla, I believe in California, somewhere around $70,000. The same vehicle here is around $300,000. So they're doing everything they can to stop people having access to them, just the way it is right now. So we don't see much of those, but I definitely would have an interest in measuring those types of vehicles, and you know, people on the ground have to maybe do that themselves and explore and give us all feedback. You can get magnetic meters, ones that will give you a good indication, for around $30 or $40 on eBay. So you don't have to have super expensive metering equipment. We use around $70,000 worth of test equipment when we do homes. But for about $40, you can get quite a nice, easy to use meter there that will give you some values to look at. If anybody has...
Can I just mention something? I got the lights off actually in my house at the moment. It's quite late, so you can't see me. But there was coming from Canada, practically, I would say about 20% of all the cars now are electric. And it's growing every single day. But what I did notice were people that were having them were starting to see some of the electromagnetic field classic symptoms. And the biggest one I did see was a young boy who slept up above where the charger was, which hadn't been put in correctly, I believe, and he got leukemia. Very young little boy. And I also think where the seats are over the wheels in the back of the majority of electric cars, they're sitting right on these hubs, right on these electrical spinning wheels, which the voltage is incredibly high. So you're actually sitting on electromagnetic fields, magnetic fields, and I've got to be honest, it can't be good for you. I'm sorry. I just recently bought an old 2002 Mercedes-Benz diesel. Gee, it's a tank, but whatever. Because I didn't want the Bluetooth and all that garbage in there, but also because the thing is better for my health. That sounds absolutely crazy coming from someone in that field. Anyway, thought that might be of interest for you. Another answer to the question about plants. Fungi or whatever you want to call them, they absolutely eat up for breakfast any of this microwave radiation. Now, we are built from bacteria. We have this symbiotic relationship with bacteria. Our mitochondria are derived from bacteria. The biggest problem we have with these EMFs is you start putting mycotoxins anywhere near a human and you can literally cause mitochondrial dysfunction on a level you've never seen before. Personally experienced it as well. So just bear that in mind. The quickest and simplest way is to just mitigate all that stuff out of your system, and that's going to affect your health. But I also love what Keith was saying as well. I've got to talk to him more about that, because we've just got a house with a 2.4 acres and I'd really love to have it flowering all year round. Anyway, enough. Back to you.
Cyril, can I ask a quick question? It's surely possible to shield these motors within these electric cars if they would just actually give the effort. Is it not? I mean, surely so, right?
Yeah, they certainly can mitigate a lot of those things. It's all part of the design principles, etc. But I mean, even domestic wiring, what Richard was saying there, where the electric car charger, which is a high current box basically that's on the wall, if you've got that in the garage and you've got a two-story house and you've got a children's bedroom upstairs, you really should check to see what the magnetic fields are in that bedroom, because even the World Health Organization has done studies and published them looking at the magnetics affecting children, and it does have a distinct effect leading to leukemia. That's in their own studies. So when someone wires a house, the electricians do not wire it with a conscious sense of what's happening. Otherwise, we'd already be using shielded cables. We'd already be conscious of where our permanent power lines are, so that we don't put them under our beds or in the ceilings of our bedrooms. And yet domestic house wiring, none of that is taken into account. It's one of the consultancy roles we take up here in Australia, helping people design not only new homes and extensions and renovations, but particularly small spaces, such tiny homes. We're able to really help them, because every error they make in distance from cables or failure to ground and shield is exasperated because they're in a tiny space. You can't walk across the room and say, okay, I'll be over here and I'll avoid that space. You don't want to waste space in a tiny home, so you need to make it and design it ahead of time. So these are things we get involved in here, helping design those and put the right materials in the right place, and omit some things, as in you don't need a power socket under your bed or next to your bed. You want to charge your phones, put all the power at the other end of the room or the other end of the building. When you go to bed, you should be sleeping. And this is the thing that I think, as a summary, humans are incredibly capable of coping with serious amounts of toxins and disturbance, but only for a certain period of time. And our resources get depleted, and eventually we become corrupted. Our information becomes corrupted, our health, our biology becomes corrupted. Now, if we go to sleep in a space that has the minimum number of toxins coming at us from even the electromagnetic frame point of view, if we can reduce that, then we get to rest and detox and recover and make use of our amazing repair abilities. But you need to give yourself that night of sleep where you're not being polluted. This is why I refer to it as a zero energy room. If you've got that room to sleep in, then you'll cope and you'll recover much better than if you are in it 100% of the time. That's, I guess, the message to share with you all. Look, we come to a close. If there's any last questions, feel free to put them up. I'm not seeing any at the moment. Linda's mentioning that she's in Amish country, so she's looking at a horse and buggy, which is a lovely way to go. If you've got the space for it and the time, that would change the pace of life, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be lovely?
I do have a question for you, Cyril.
Yes.
We talked about Tesla. We talked about all of that stuff, but we haven't mentioned Elon Muskie rats, 12,000 satellites, Amazon's God knows how many. In fact, I think he's due to put up 40,000 satellites. And if you actually do the research, there is no need for this number of satellites going up into space. You and I know that. What are your thoughts? How are we going to mitigate that?
It's a nightmare. It's it's a nightmare. Nightmare scenario, should we say? I don't have a good solution other than having to find that space to sleep, and shutting it all down in that space and recovering in our cave, so to speak, going home to our cave and sleeping and resting and being hopefully more resilient to be able to go out into what will be an ever more poisonous environment. I'm truly hoping that it doesn't need to go ahead, and I really find it difficult to understand how one business and one country think that they have the right to pollute the entire planet without regard to anyone. And there's the loss of the night sky, which I find awful. The thought that at the moment you can go out and sit in your chair at night and you can watch the stars and the universe and the planet, and we have been watching that for millions of years, you know, and it's shaped our cultures, it's shaped our beliefs, and to then destroy that view and cover it entirely with satellites, so that only in very small locations on Earth will you get to see the sky again, that I feel is a criminal act. That's obscene. So that obstruction of the view of the sky is just a form of vandalism, let alone what will happen regarding electromagnetics and this process. So yeah, the whole thing is quite worrying, and I don't really know where it's going to go.
I know that Arthur Furstenberg, who wrote the Invisible Rainbow, interesting man, he basically has been cataloguing people's symptomology since the introduction of where the satellites are going over, including over me here in France, in this particular area. So I just, I know people who are experiencing heart palpitations. How much of that is actually directly as a result of that, we can't be certain. But I just thought that might be interesting. We're already seeing them going across the night sky in clusters, and that's only what I think it's 480 up now, and there's due to be 40,000. Yeah, very interesting. Which way that?
From your view, how bright were they in clusters? Were they starting to distract from the night sky?
Totally distracting from the night sky.
Yeah.
You can see them; they're as clear as day.
Yes, yeah, and that's an awful thing to see, from the point of view that it'll go from a novelty to just lights in the sky, and we'll lose the recognition of where we are in the universe as you know, as that gets worse. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions here for the moment. Here's one from Patricia. Cyril, could you mention your website again? Yeah, our website is healthexpressworld.com. That's one. You just have some very basic things in there, but that's a great way to contact us through admin@healthexpressworld.com if you have any questions. And if anybody has any interest in what types of proper commercial metering there is, that's something you might see on our website, emfsafety.com.au. So that one is .com.au, and the Australian emfsafety.com.au, and the other one is just .com, which is healthexpressworld.com. We have YouTube channels as well, with materials and information on as well, so you'll find those on the web. All right, we're going to come to a stop now, and we have recorded this, so we'll tidy that up, and then we'll put it on that channel, and then send everybody a link, so you've got something to work with there. I'll just leave a moment to see if we've got any final words from Keith and Richard, and then if there's no more questions, we'll draw it to a close. There we go. All right then.